They really did go all the way to Bugtown, though I wouldn't learn that until later that night, long after the scene that unfolded at the Haydens when she got home. Any sane girl would have had Johnny drop her off a couple of blocks from her house and manufactured some plausible excuse for her tardiness. An extra hour at the library, a study session that had run too long. Not Joan. That wouldn't have created the intended effect. I was watching from my open bedroom window. The September air still had the glow of summer, when the Merc rumbled up to the curb. Joan's father was waiting at the door. He couldn't have been home long himself. He hadn't even loosened his tie. He was an insurance salesman, though why a man so devoted to the rewards of the afterlife should take such an interest in the perils of this one, I never could understand. But he certainly took an interest in the perils Johnny Fabriano posed to his daughter's eternal soul. The Merc thundered away before Joan was halfway up the sidewalk. By the time she reached the front porch, the shouting had begun. It continued for the next hour or so, and while I couldn't make out the words, it didn't take a genius to figure out the tenor of the back and forth between Joan and her father. Her mother was silent, of course. She knew her place in the biblical hierarchy of the home. Joan, however, well, her father's fury only goaded her to greater histrionics. The entire thing culminated in slammed doors. He'd locked her into her room, of course. He always did. It wasn't until after my own dinner that I worked up the courage to call. "Joan isn't available, Nancy," her father told me, and I could hear the suppressed fury in his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Hayden," I said. "I guess I'll catch her in school." But I never got to finish the phrase. "How much do you know about this Johnny Fabriano, Nancy?" he said. "Not much, sir. Were you with Joan this afternoon?" I hesitated a moment too long. "Well then," he said, "I'm very disappointed in you, Nancy. In fact, I'd like to speak with your father if he's available." He was. My mother shook her head in commiseration when I called him over, and my father winked when he took the phone. He listened patiently to Mr. Hayden and made all the right noises in return. But when he finished the conversation, I didn't get much of a scolding. My father wasn't the scolding type, and besides, we attended the Disciples of Christ Church, which was about as liberal as you could get in Milledgeville, Ohio in 1955. He bought his insurance from Mr. Hayden, but he didn't have much in the way of personal respect for him. "Just be a good friend to her, Nance," he said. "God knows she needs one, living in that house." Around 1:00 a.m., Joan woke me with a handful of pebbles at my window. This came as no surprise. Sneaking out was routine business to Joan. Just shimmy down the big oak tree outside her window and clamber back up it whenever she'd accomplished whatever mischief she had to accomplish. "So what's he like?" I whispered the minute I had her installed in my bedroom. And when she responded, "Dreamy, Nance, he's just dreamy," my heart fell. Dreamy was not good. Dreamy had the potential for disaster. But what could I do? Discouraging her would merely encourage her, and encouraging her would do the same. It was an impossible hand to play, and I opted then, as I had opted so many times in the past, not to play it at all. I opted for neutrality. It was as close as I could come to fulfilling my father's injunction to be a good friend to Joan. So what I said was dreamy, with conviction, dreamy. "He's not like other boys, Nancy. He's not like you think." "What do you mean?" "Nobody understands him. Everybody thinks he's some cheap hood." This last she practically spat. "But he's not at all. Why? Did you know he takes care of his mother? His father's dead and she's not well, and he does just everything for her, and nobody understands what a good heart he has. And he's so gentle and soft-spoken, and he wants to know all about me. He's really interested in me, not just in, you know," she broke off blushing. "Sure, that's what you think," I didn't say. What I thought was that Johnny was just smoother than the usual high school Lothario who tried to get his hand, or worse, up Joan's skirt. He was 21. He knew how to play the long game. Like I said, he had an agenda of his own. Have you ever known a man who didn't? "Did you kiss him?" "Just once. Right before we pulled up to the house. His lips are so soft. You wouldn't think that the way he looks, would you?" I wouldn't. But I didn't say that either. Instead, I asked where they had gone. Joan looked down. She was quiet for a long time, and when she met my gaze at last, I saw that she was afraid. "We went to Bugtown," she said. Which brings me back to the aliens, the bugs as people called them. Though, as I said at the beginning of this story, that was just lazy thinking, because they didn't really look anything like bugs, and maybe their appearance isn't all you're curious about. Maybe you want to know where they came from and why and what they plan to do. But I don't have answers to any of that. They just started drifting into town by twos and threes and buying up the decaying houses over in the East End. Who can say why? They were aliens after all, and their motives were as inscrutable as Joan's were self-evident. Their appearance, on the other hand, there was no mystery about that. They were monstrous things to look at. Olive green, 7-foot giants, their squarish heads bifurcated by a big ropey artery that clove their skulls into disproportionate lobes. It wound down between their lidless, black eyes, shark black and as empty of expression, and split into frills of bony, close-knit flesh that almost looked like baleen. Their mouths nestled between those frills were the most disturbing feature of all. 3 slavering flaps of tissue that dilated open to reveal jagged, yellow teeth. All this set atop a massive torso armored in bone, with thick arms and legs and large 3-taloned hands, and strong. My freshman year, the first year the aliens showed up at Milledgeville High, Coach Pack recruited 3 or 4 of them for the football team. Where he found uniforms to fit them, I have no idea. Perhaps he had them custom made. In any case, the aliens were lethally effective on the gridiron, and we would win the state championship 2 years running, despite the virulent protests of our rivals. Yet the aliens, I won't call them bugs, were essentially gentle creatures, even shy. They kept to themselves and they listened attentively to our teachers. They contributed to class in moist, lisping whispers. They took copious notes. Their handwriting was beautiful. But Bugtown? I knew nothing about Bugtown that I haven't already told you. I was as curious as anybody else about the place, but not curious enough to risk catching strange. So part of me stood in admiration of Joan for daring to go there in the first place. Another part was furious with her, knowing how much she'd risked to defy her father and her father's God. But whatever her motivations, Joan had little to say about Bugtown. When I asked her about it, her gaze grew distant, as though she were looking straight through me to some faraway horizon. And when she answered me, her voice was a hollow whisper. I knew then that she'd been touched by strangeness, but I did not yet perceive how deep the wound ran or how unbearable its consequences would be. Not merely for her and Johnny Fabriano, but for us all. I began to get an inkling of that, but nothing more, the next day at school. There were 2 aliens in our first period English class. I can't tell you their real names. I can't reproduce their slobbery, whistling language, and certainly not on the page. But when the aliens moved to Milledgeville, they'd taken human names as well. So you'd see Jim at the hardware store, sighting down 2x4s to make sure they hadn't warped, or Susan at the A&P, inquiring about the freshness of the tomatoes. None of them had quite mastered English pronunciation. I expect their weird dilating mouths precluded mastery, but they could make themselves understood well enough to get along. Thim got unbowed 2x4s, Thuthon fresh tomatoes. And the 2 aliens in our English class, Eloyeth, Eloise, and Tom, Sam, also the star fullback for the Milledgeville Bears, got straight A's. The semester wasn't even 2 weeks old and they'd already displaced me as Mrs. Guest's favorite student. Eloyeth and Tom, yes, I'm going to call them that, not to mock them, but to keep their intrinsic strangeness front and center, were the kind of students who read their assignments days in advance, sat in the front row, and shot their talons up the minute Mrs. Guest asked a question. But Mrs. Guest didn't always call on the kids with their hands up. She had an eye for the doodler and the daydreamer, and just as you were drifting off into some pleasant fantasy or other, she'd bludgeon you with a question, which is what happened to Joan that morning. This in itself wasn't surprising. Joan was an indifferent student at best, if only because her father expected more of her, and she was an inveterate daydreamer. But when Mrs. Guest fired that morning's question in her direction, Joan seemed to have drifted not into some idle fancy, but into a deep hypnotic state. She didn't respond, didn't so much as stir. Only when Mrs. Guest repeated the question, pointedly and at volume, did Joan look up, a puzzled look on her face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Guest." "What are you sorry for, Miss Hayden?" "I didn't hear you, that's all." If you could repeat the question, maybe. Joan trailed off into silence. Yes, why don't I repeat myself? Surely I have nothing better to do. In stanza 9, Keats writes, "And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed. Ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside." What do you think he means, Miss Hayden? Miss Hayden had no reply on the matter of meaning. The moment stretched. You could hear nothing but the tick of the round schoolroom clock on the wall. Miss Hayden! But once again, Joan had drifted off. Tam made some weird whistling sound deep in his throat. "Please, Sam," Mrs. Guest said. "I think we're all expecting to hear from Miss Hayden." Silence. People stared at their desks' tops. Joan, however, seemed unfazed. She'd propped her elbow on her desk, her chin on the heel of her hand. "Perhaps you need to see the nurse, Miss Hayden." A subdued ripple of nervous laughter greeted this not very funny witticism. Mrs. Guest silenced it with a glare. "Miss Hayden," she began. But Tom interrupted her, emitting a long, damp series of clicks and whistles. Joan visibly shook herself in response, and a strange expression, half wonder, half fear, crossed her face. "I saw this, I say. I did not imagine it." She shook herself in response and met Mrs. Guest's gaze with an almost physical force. Mrs. Guest shuddered and recoiled. "This too I saw. This too I did not imagine." "The night has been lulled into sleep, Mrs. Guest," Joan said firmly, as you might speak to a disobedient child. "He has been enchanted into nightmare by a fairy in the guise of a beautiful woman, and though he may wake upon the cold hillside, he shall never truly wake again, because one does not wake from a fairy's enchantment." Eloyeth let out a long, mournful whistle when Joan finished, and then she and Tom both turned away. Silence gripped the classroom. Mrs. Guest swallowed. "I think that's enough for today," she said. "If you'll turn to page 74 and answer the discussion questions, we'll take up Ode on a Grecian Urn tomorrow." And she retreated to her desk and sat very still and pale until the bell rang for second period.